The early life of Henry Hudson remains a mystery because there is very little information on his life before 1607. The earliest record of Hudson before 1607 was as a mate on the ship of Captain John Davis in 1587, but this remains a debated fact to this day. Even with this lack of information on his life, some conclusions can be reached about his earlier years. With his expertise in navigating, it is widely believed that he had spent much of his youth sailing aboard ships. What is known about his personal life is that he came from a wealthy family and had a wife and 3 sons. The oldest of Hudson's sons would always join him on his voyages. Hudson's friends consisted mostly of other captains, including Captain John Smith. They all spoke very highly of Hudson and had a great amount of respect for him. As for his personality, Hudson could best be described as a shy and aloof person. He never liked large crowds or receiving praise and glory for his explorations. He would say that all this attention would make him feel very uncomfortable, and would much rather be alone with his own thoughts. This was evident in his voyages, as he never knew how to handle and confront his crew, which contributed to the many mutinies he faced. Although he was very shy, he was also very stubborn and had a fiery personality. Hudson would oftentimes disobey orders for the sake of his own exploration, which would get him into trouble with his sponsors. Even with all this, Hudson was still seen as personable. As his son Oliver said, "My father would say in 5 words what others required hundreds to relate." He listened with care too, and always understood what someone else was saying to him long before the other finished his explanation. Much of what is known about Henry Hudson comes from his life as an explorer. His first voyage was in 1607 as he attempted to find a new route to the Indies through the northeast. There was a lot of support for these voyages to find a quicker route to the Indies. By finding a shorter passage, it would allow the companies to make more money and trade more efficiently. The first company that would sponsor Hudson was the Muscovy Company. In this voyage, Hudson would attempt to sail over the North Pole. However, Hudson failed in this attempt as he only made it within 577 miles of the North Pole before he was forced to turn back because of ice, thick fog, and storms. As he noted in his log, "But now, finding by proof it was impossible by means of the abundance of ice, we returned." Although he did not find a passage on this voyage, he did set a navigational record which stood for 100 years as he made it closer to the North Pole than anyone else. Not discouraged by his first failure, Hudson again set sail in 1608 for the same company to find a passage to the Indies. This time, however, he would sail up the coast of Norway looking for inlets to the Kara Sea. From here, he would be able to sail up the coast of Siberia before reaching the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately for Hudson, he was unable to find any straits to the Kara Sea because of the thick ice blocking them and was forced to sail back. But Hudson was very determined to find a passage to the Indies, and instead of sailing back to England, he decided to push westward to the Atlantic. Once the crew found out that they were not heading back to England, they staged a mutiny which forced Hudson to return home. This is an example of how Hudson was unable to confront his crew as he quickly gave in to their demands. Hudson did not see it this way, however, as he said in his logs that, "I gave my company a certificate under my hand of my free and willing return, without the persuasion or force of any one or more of them." But the reality is that Hudson was forced to return home by his men. Although Hudson was able to escape this mutiny, it would serve as a foreshadow for his final voyage where he would not be so lucky. After 2 failed attempts at finding a northeast passage, he could not find any more companies to sponsor a voyage in England. So in 1609 he turned to the Dutch, who were very interested to find a trade route that was not dominated by Spain, Portugal, or England. They were familiar with Hudson's explorations, and the United Dutch East India Company employed him to try to find a quicker route to the Indies. The Dutch were also familiar with Hudson's attempt to sail west, so they made it very clear in his contract that he was only to find a northeastern passage. This would mean very little to Hudson, as he made it as far as the White Sea before stormy weather forced him to turn around. But instead of turning back to Holland, Hudson again decided to go west towards the Atlantic. Hudson explored the eastern coastline of what would be the United States, and on September 11th sailed into the New York harbor looking for a western passage. He noted in his logs that it was a very good harbor and had very favorable winds. He navigated 150 miles of the river before deciding that he could not go any further, and then turned back. This river would come to be known as the Hudson River based on his explorations. Hudson's 4th journey would turn out to be his last. This time he would again sail for England in 1610, as a group of merchant adventurers sponsored his voyage as they too were looking for a northwestern passage. From his previous voyage, Hudson knew that the passage was not on the east coast of America, so he decided to sail further north. While sailing north, he and his crew experienced a harsh winter, which left them frozen aboard their ship in a body of water that would become known as the Hudson Bay. The icy conditions made life for the crew very difficult, as they became exhausted trying to keep the ship afloat. So Hudson decided to wait out the winter on land and continue westward once the ship had thawed out. Conditions began to improve by June of 1611, and Hudson wanted to continue with his exploration. The rest of the crew was not as excited as Hudson to continue the journey. They were running desperately low on food and had to resort to food allowances for the remainder of the voyage. The diary of one of the survivors said that Hudson showed favoritism in rationing the food, and much of the crew did not like this policy. It did not take long for the crew to begin discussing mutiny, as they argued that Hudson valued exploration more than life itself. This feeling was not only felt by his crew, as Hudson's friend Captain John Smith also described him this way. He said about Hudson that he considers extreme hazards as natural as breathing, and he assumes that every man who sails with him has courage equal to his own. I honestly believe that the greater the danger, the more he enjoys himself. There is speculation that Hudson did not even attempt to stop the mutiny, as he was too shy to stand up for himself against his crew. This was not totally unexpected, as many of the personal characters and ethics of the crew had been brought into question prior to the voyage. But Hudson trusted these men enough to bring them along, which would turn out to be a costly mistake. The mutiny succeeded in removing Hudson from command. After the crew took command, they put Hudson, his son, and 7 others who were either too sick or loyal to continue on a shallop and sent them off to sea. None of these men were ever seen again. Upon arriving to England, there had been questions about what had happened on the ship and to Hudson, which prompted England's High Court of the Admiralty to look into the case. However, the court did not convict any of the men of wrongdoing. The 3 men who had been most responsible for the mutiny were killed by Eskimos during the trip back to England. But those who did make it back claimed that they had discovered the northern passage that was so sought after by European naval powers, and were rewarded with more expeditions to chart the passage and to find additional routes. In the end, Henry Hudson died doing what he loved most, exploring. If he had been able to overcome his shyness and confront the men, maybe the mutiny would have turned out differently. His men argued that Hudson valued exploration more than life itself, and in the end, this turned out to be true, as it was his desire to continue the expedition that led to his death.